Hello, and welcome to the Scroll Sanity Podcast. I'm Carmella Giel.
And I am Nic Carmella, let's jump right in with our moments brought to us by our dumb phone, because I think we both had really interesting last couple weeks. Why don't you start us off?
Sure. So, when I had a smartphone, I used to check my email as a mindless habit. But now, without a smartphone, I've noticed I've been falling behind on email.
Mm.
So, I've just had the realization that I need to actually set aside intentional time for checking and answering emails. And also, at the risk of being a completely insufferable Luddite, I recently purchased a disposable camera. And so I've been having some fun experimenting with that, but I'm not sure if it's going to be a viable long-term option. But at least it's fun, and I don't mind handing it to my kids and having them mess around with it.
That's fun. Yeah, on the flip side, have had a pretty challenging last couple weeks. We had a great episode with Joe Hollier, the co-founder of the Light Phone, talking about just how hard it is to build and launch your own communication device like the Light Phone. As we've disclosed to our listeners, we are both users of the Light Phone. And Joe on the podcast announced that they were launching a timer feature so people could make sure they get their rice off the stove and that kind of thing, which is great. But unfortunately, once the timer update was pushed to my device, I can no longer answer phone calls. When my light phone rings, the screen goes black. And no matter what I do, I can't take any action. And so I have to miss every call and then check the voicemail or call the number back. And if they're not in my caller ID, I might be calling a sales call back without knowing it. And as I've mentioned in past episodes, I work in the media and in the creative field. And so sometimes that stuff can be time sensitive, and missing calls and having to check voicemails and that kind of thing has been pretty frustrating. It's probably been the biggest hurdle I've run into with a light phone to date. Full disclosure, that team has been amazing. They're working with me to troubleshoot issues and all that kind of stuff. It's one of those things that when you're not working with a multi-trillion-dollar tech conglomerate or a multi-billion-dollar wireless carrier, you're going to run into issues that you have to deal with. And so it's a friction I'm dealing with, but I do have a new flow that I'm trying, and it ties into our guest today, which I'm really excited to jump into. So I learned about these guys via Reddit, looking in dumb phone communities where I spend a lot of time. And they are the co-founders of SLEKE. It is a startup out of Nevada working to really bridge the gap between the super frictionful dumb phones like the Light Phone and the hyper connected, the digital deal with the devil that you make in the modern smartphone. And so Austin and Brennan, why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your origin, how you got to know each other?
I'm Austin Boer.
I'm Brennan Jordan.
And like Nic had mentioned, we are the co-founders of SLEKE,
which is a smartphone optimized for everyday life.
We met during our time at college at University of Nevada, Reno. Had a great experience there, became good friends. I ended up moving abroad for a couple of years.
And so I didn't really know what to do after college. We spent a lot of time together then. So then I went over to Asia because I had no idea what to do. So then we spent quite a few years over there, really just immersing ourselves in a different culture, quite the high-tech culture. We, in college, even got started doing our own little side hustles early. There was one thing where we were selling custom pre-workout blends to our other roommates based on what their goals were. So we would buy all the ingredients and then make custom blends. The dosages of ingredients are important for anyone looking at everything. We would make some people go like super flushed red in the gym sometimes because we gave them too much niacin. So that was fun. But we've come a long way since then, I'll tell you.
I was going to say, so enterprising, entrepreneurial, and not afraid to experiment, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
I know your time in Asia really influenced where you guys are headed with SLEKE. So could you talk a little bit more about what you experienced over there?
So we found how much of a utility your phone truly is, whether it's booking taxis or Ubers, whether it's food orders, whether it's trying to book tickets for transit. Over and over, you see how useful your phone is, with mobile payments being at the forefront. Even the grandma on the side of the road, she has the ability to have a QR code that you scan for your mobile payments. So it's something that's a necessity for everyday life.
In terms of it being a necessity, we also noticed that life became more frictionless with everything in your pocket. But with that, they were using the same smartphones as we're using here, which means the distracting stuff is mixed in with that helpful stuff. When you're on the subway, everybody is on their phones. Absolutely everybody. which take it as you will. Maybe they're being productive, but we thought that maybe they're spending a little too much time with their head in their phones. And what we found is people that were just over there as expats is it was immediately obvious to us how much we were on our phones because we were immersed in an environment where everything was new and everything was exciting and there's all these beautiful experiences and places and people. So when we go to use our phones for this tool or that tool, we found ourselves staying on our phone to check this social media app or check that. And after we got off the phone, we'd realize, oh, we just missed this or we just missed that. And so it was more obvious because of that juxtaposition of the newness of everything, but still being stuck in our old ways of being hooked on our phone.
Well, and Brennan, you mentioned the old ways. I'm curious if we take a step back before college, before expatriating to Asia for a few years, when did the smartphone enter both of your lives? I think Carmella and I might have a few more years and a few more miles on us than you two do. So I'm curious for your generation, were you born with the smartphone in your hand, so to speak, or did it come to you later? Just curious how that experience was for both of you.
I started off with a simple flip phone in middle school, and then when I was able to save up enough money, I finally got my smartphone in high school. And I found that initially it was still being used as a communication device. It wasn't really a whole entertainment package. It was more still communicating with friends. Where are we meeting up this and this day? What are we going to do? It wasn't entertainment like it is today. It was still very much a tool. And I think for me, I started to see it get out of control once I got into college. Then it was more of an entertainment device. So I started to take a step back from that.
And probably a similar experience for me. Got my first phone it was an iPhone in high school, and then it wasn't really necessarily a problem at first, even if there were games. Surely, somewhere in college it started getting a little out of hand. Probably because, and this is in reference to maybe something that your previous guest had said about an addiction being a cover for not dealing with something else in your life. Probably in college, both socially and academically, things got very stressful. So I'm guessing, at least for me, the smartphone was just a convenient distraction for the stresses of life at that point. And then there was a certain path dependence where once I started using it as a bit of a crutch, it just became the new MO, and it just got more and more until we decided, okay, maybe there has to be a change here.
Right. Yeah. And Brennan, you're referring to our interview with writer Maret Baruch, who was on a previous episode, and I think helped us crack open this idea that the coping mechanism of the smartphone is probably masking some other issues or being used to avoid some of the greater stresses in life. And knowing that you spent time in Asia where you saw the proliferation and ubiquity of the smartphone give rise to this unsettling and harsh reality that the more I use this, the more anxious I am. Was that the inciting moment for the two of you in the origins of SLEKE?
It came from a conversation in 2019, just talking about finding ways to get off of social media. It was really a quick conversation trying to see what was out there as far as utility and how living in Asia, like Brennan had mentioned, it's a huge utility factor, but it was taking away from us living in the moment. A couple years later, it came back in the conversation. We were keeping an eye out for possible solutions. Flip phone was out of the picture just because it still needed some sort of smartphone, but there was nothing on the market to have the technological advantage without the distraction. And trying to find a way to bridge that gap is what led us to writing down, if we can make our own smartphone, what would we include and what would we not include? And we drew it up on a little index card, and that was the initial start of it.
Cool. And so why don't you tell us a little bit, what is SLEKE?
Sure. What we like to say at first is that it's a smartphone optimized for life's everyday activities. So that's really alludes to our goal of trying to make folks using the phone prepared to interact in their everyday lives, specifically within high-tech environments where you need to have access to some of these digital tools, but without going too far, without providing them so much access to so many applications that they are also experiencing the distracting elements of the smartphone platform. So what that looks like in principle is we optimize our features towards communication and utility features only and nothing more. So that means we break it down into what we call the 5 M's, which is maps, money, music, messaging, and management features, meaning managing the needs of your everyday life, and then not providing a browser, games, multimedia, or social media. So in a nutshell, making your phone a tool again and a phone again.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I have been testing the SLEKE device for about a week now. And of my own volition, I paid my own money. I'm a regular customer like anybody else. But when I was first introduced to this concept of SLEKE, I thought it was really interesting because, again, I am a former self-admitted tech addict who made the switch to the light phone. And I would say that's like going from living in a spaceship to moving to the Stone Age in some respects, in a really beautiful way, because it really does allow you to be much more mindful about your usage. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, I've been dealing with some frictions that have been really difficult in my day-to-day life. One of the biggest hurdles I've run into to date has been that I can't access my baby monitor. My baby monitor was done via smartphone. And so since I switched to the light phone, that entire responsibility has fallen on my wife. And that feels a little maybe out of balance. She's handled it really well, but I've definitely felt some guilt about that. And so what's really interesting about something like SLEKE, which is built on a smartphone platform, which I'm sure you guys will talk about in a minute, is that there is that bridge, as you said, to some of these utilities that are really important. I made a request to the co-founders, Austin and Brennan of SLEKE, to include my baby monitor as part of their simple store, and they did. And now I can access my baby monitor again for the first time since January of 2024. So a pretty profound shift in that regard. But specific to the idea of adding features and what gets added and what doesn't, it sounds like you have, I love the 5 M's. It sounds like you have a really good baseline for what gets added, what doesn't. But I'm curious, as co-founders, friends, college buddies who are now embarking on this journey, how it's got to be challenging. Are there moments where you don't see eye to eye?
So beyond just co-founding, we do live together as well. And the biggest thing was we found that we were always talking about SLEKE nonstop. It'll be midnight. We'll spark a conversation about what to include, what not to include. Little bickers about what color we're going to actually have as our main colors. So it's nothing, we've had no really big challenges. A lot of it we've worked through. It's just small things. When are we going to push this feature? When are we going to reach out to this influencer or take part of this redesign, and finding ways to counterbalance when all this stuff is going to be released.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's learning how to work together in a professional context. But like Austin said, we work through that and we work well together, even so much that I handle a lot of the product side. He handles a lot of the people side. But I know enough about the people side. He knows enough about the product side that if one of us can't take X, Y, or Z task or meeting, or if one of us is having an off day or we need a second, the other one can pick up that slack. But the biggest friction we've had so far is not necessarily with each other working, but it's definitely that work-life balance. When you start something new, yeah, you can always find yourself working on it to the point of obsession, which breaks you down as a person and which might be unsustainable in the long term. And one of the things that we really are promoting with the phone is a phone life balance in a phrase, to say there are a lot of cool things on the smartphone. Those things aren't necessarily bad, but maybe things have gotten a bit out of balance. And so in our friendship, and so like our friend work balance and our own lives, between our personal lives and our work lives, even though we should be working around the clock on this because it's a startup, we really want to make sure we're taking care to have that work-life balance, because we only get one life, and so we want to do it well.
Yeah, I love that. And the other nice thing, as much as you want to have that work-life balance, living together, if you have a brilliant idea in the middle of the night, you just have to go down the hall, I imagine. So that's good.
So SLEKE works with the Google Pixel 5. And
Correct.
so how does that work? Are you providing the phone, or are people sending in their phones and then you're uploading your own operating system?
So initially right now, we are working with our distributors for Google Pixel 5s. We found that there's a huge lot of old stock just sitting around. And financially, we're bootstrapping from the whole company. So being able to do things financially smart is a big incentive for us to start with the Google Pixel 5 and then keep moving to the whole Pixel line. But right off the bat, we are working with our refurbisher to get the Pixel 5s.
And one of the reasons we're working with the Google Pixel 5, we talk financially, is in the Pixel line, the 5 is probably in the middle of all the Pixels they've had. It's not the newest, but it's not the oldest. So in terms of price point, we talk about there's a certain affordability to the 5 that we think makes sense for people buying it, because we don't think, like, people are used to paying like $1,000 now for a phone. And while it would be nice for us to make $1,000 a phone, we're like, all right, we're providing a phone with optimized functionality, but still less than you would expect from a normal smartphone. And we think that the price needs to make sense with that, which is why we're starting with the 5. And why we're not going with new phones either is because there's a new phone every year, which is okay, especially if you're a techie, that's good. But from our perspective, there's so much of this electronic waste that just goes into landfill. And based on our experience with the 5, it's still a perfectly good phone, and it's still perfectly fast. So we thought to ourselves, is there any reason to only provide our firmware on the most recent hardware? Not really. So we can do a good deed to the planet while keeping the phone at a relatively decent price point for people using it. That's why we went with the 5.
Taking it a step further, here in the US, we're so used to having our phones carrier locked. So we can only use specific phones with specific carriers. Where you go to a lot of other countries and it's agnostic. You can use any SIM card, just pop it into the phone and there's no problems. So we're trying to do that with SLEKE, where if you're on Verizon, if you're on AT&T, if you're on XYZ and another grandfathered in from an old plan that you got 20 years ago, you're able to still pop that SIM card into our phone. And we found that's one less friction. All right, what does that entail with looking at my contract? Is it going to mess that up? Just finding a way to remove as many frictions as possible.
I like this concept of using the waste, essentially. It's something that I've been talking about with some people who are iPhone users, where a perfectly good device becomes obsolete just because the updates no longer work with like old operating systems. And so now it's this planned obsolescence where the phone works perfectly fine, but they can't use any of the apps anymore. And it's really frustrating for a lot of people, especially like older people who really don't want to update or change a device because it's hard enough to learn one operating system and then there's small changes, and that can be a really big problem for elderly populations.
I think one of the things, as I said, recovering tech addict, I've had every Pixel phone they ever made. I go all the way back to the original Android phone. And it's so interesting because I was one of those spec upgrade junkies. Every time a new phone came out, I had to have it, and thinking it would make me happy. Boy, was I wrong about that. But what I think is interesting is, and maybe this is a controversial statement, but the smartphone peaked 5 years ago, maybe even more than that, especially when you think about utility. The Pixel 5, which it's been 5 days that I've been using the SLEKE device, and I'll be happy to share my experiences with our listeners as we go forward in the podcast. But one thing that stood out to me right away was, oh, I remember the Pixel 5. I had this phone whenever it came out, and it was great at the time. And using it now, it doesn't feel dissimilar to the iPhone 14 Pro I got rid of. It really is. It's got a high refresh rate screen. It's a smooth experience. It's bright. The camera does what I need it to do. It's really responsive. There's no lag. And that's what smartphones landed at in, 2020 or 2017 even. And so I think when we talk about reducing e-waste, these devices, Carmella, as you just said, are perfectly good. They're being replaced because the company needs to prove that they're shipping more units. And so they have to ship a new product to demonstrate to shareholders they're shipping more units. And I would argue that a smartphone could have done everything we needed it to do almost 10 years ago.
Exactly. And one of the things that I saw on your website is that you have a different approach to the search engine, and it's an answer-based search engine. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
We found that through our market research, there's a lot of use cases for what people look for on the web. A lot of these are quite useful. It could be, how do I cook salmon? How do I change a tire? Why are my sprinklers not working? These are some day-to-day frictions that we often look on our cell phone. So our goal was, how do we provide this information in a non-distracting manner? So we're able to do that through the answer engine, as it still pulls results from the web, but it brings it in just a text-based, non-distracting manner. nothing to pull you into a realm of continuous scrolling or an opportunity to search or go to another website.
And what it sounds like is, if anybody listening or you guys have ever used ChatGPT, someone might say, oh, this is just ChatGPT and that's not connected to the internet. So you're just pretending it's a search engine. So the output looks similar to what would be ChatGPT, text-based answers based on pre-trained data. But how our answer engine works is you put in your search, what's the weather in Reno today? And what it will do is go search the internet, and it has a list of websites that has a reputation score for reliability, trustworthiness, brevity. Then it gets those results, summarizes those results, and it gives you that summary in a text-based answer. In the long term, what we're also going to be adding is sources. So it'll be able to cite sources from where this summary comes from, and you'll be able to click on those citations and then read that full article from that source without having full access to the entire web.
When you click on the source, would you also see the ads on that page?
Probably. We might be able to find a way to change that a bit, but what it would do is it takes you to that website. If you're curious enough to see the source, it'll just take you directly to that website. And so if that website is running ads, then you would see the ads. If it's not, then you wouldn't.
What's so interesting about that question is really how the paradigm of the web is about to shift, because the way that the business model of the internet works right now is people type in a search query. They are served ads first. Some people don't even know that the first 5 to 10 links on Google are sponsored ads. And then you click on a web page, and then that web page is covered in ads. Even the most reputable sites now, I think we can all agree, are covered. They're almost unusable. Whereas these text-based functionalities, like the answer-based engine that SLEKE is creating, it is this more text-based model. It's stripping out what was the money before. But the use case for users is much better. And I've used SLEKE's answer-based engine for a few days now, and it's been really nice to go, what's the phone number for this local cafe? And can I call them? Or what's their address? Which, again, you can't necessarily do on some other dumb phones, but I don't have access to a browser where I can just start looking at content again. So it's a really interesting use case. I think the way the SLEKE team is trying to bridge that gap is really compelling. And with that in mind, I'm curious if from Austin and Brennan, from your perspectives, how do you see SLEKE impacting users' lives? You've seen the feature-rich smartphones in Asia and even here at home impacting lives both positively from a utility perspective, negatively from the attention and data and privacy perspectives. How do you think SLEKE fits in?
The benefit is going to be a sense of presence that at least we didn't remember that we had, because it's been so long since pre-smartphone. But what we found when we started using it was that there is about a 3-week, we could call it cool down period, where your brain is readjusting to not habitually checking the phone, where after those 3 weeks, it's nothing transformative. It's not like the dopamine hit you would get from likes on Instagram or eating a bar of chocolate, but it's some sense of very relaxing, calm, present. It's that presence that makes you feel comfortable sitting on a park bench and just looking around. And when's the last time you were able to do that without at least thinking, oh, let me check my phone? So it's the biggest value add, at least for me, is a subtle re-entering into the now.
Awesome.
For me, it's being intentional with my time. And if I want to reach out to friends, I reach out to friends. If I want to watch a YouTube video, I'm still able to do that and just use my laptop, but I go directly to that video and I don't get bogged down in all the rest of the noise. So I find that when I do stuff, I'm methodical about it. It's something that I truly want to do, and I go through it with intention. It's not just out of habit. It's breaking that giant habit of habitually checking.
That's something I was speaking about with a parent yesterday. I was telling her that I'm using my laptop a lot more, that I have the dumb phone, but the difference is I don't have my laptop in my pocket when I'm at the playground with my kids or when I'm taking a walk. So yes, I'm using my laptop more when I'm home, but it's also helping me be more in the now, both at home and outside of the home. So I totally understand what you guys are going for, and I'm into it.
There was an article in the New Yorker this past month about the dumb phone boom being real. And we'll share a link to that in the show notes for this episode. So it speaks to this movement. People are switching away from the traditional smartphone for all the reasons we're describing. I'm curious for SLEKE, which is getting in at the early stages of this boom, what does the future of the project look like? Where do you hope to take this over the next few years as people wake up to this idea that I could maybe make different purchasing decisions that will actually impact my overall health and life?
This is a great question, and it's something that we're very excited about with the direction of where we're going. Right now, we are figuring out what is that Goldilocks zone of functionality so that you feel totally equipped to interact with our super technological world, but not going too far like we discussed before. Where we want to go is we want to say, okay, cool. Now that we've gotten a balance with our devices here, what does life look like? And for a lot of people, they remember what life looks like, and they could probably very easily grab onto old habits, grab onto old things that they like to do in real life. But there are a crazy amount of people, specifically Gen Z and younger, which don't remember what life is like without a supercomputer in their pockets.
I love that so much. That is really fascinating that you guys are thinking about that, because there is that hole between, okay, I'm off my smartphone. And I'm curious, what's the response been from early adopters of the SLEKE phone?
We're currently in our early stage testing phase. We are working with 8 different testers. We've been hopping on a call with them at least once a week. Some of us were in constant communication, which is nice. And the response has been really good. It's gotten to a point where people feel comfortable going out with just this phone. They're able to interact with all of their daily needs, just like we've hoped for. There is some bugs that we've been working out, but that's just going to happen in early stage. So we keep working with them, trying to find their pain points and how can we bridge those gaps to where if you have the urge to grab another device to check a banking app or something, how are we able to adapt to that and provide that solution? For Nic, it was the baby monitor. Being able to provide that for him is huge. So if we can keep doing that, what does that look like for all these edge cases?
We're talking where we are today, the early days of SLEKE, and really the early days of the dumb phone movement. You mentioned the testing pool, of which I am a part and excited to be. I'm curious, what can listeners expect from SLEKE in the near future? Are there upcoming updates or features you're excited about?
We have
more improvements to our model so far. So as we're building our third-party offerings, we really want to make sure we're doing it right. So we are going to be doing it slow but correctly. But all that to say, growing our third-party ecosystem so people feel equipped with the tools that they're familiar with, so they don't have to use whatever tool we choose to give them.
I live in the second largest city in New England. And so to get around to share money with friends or businesses, in some cases, my barbershop, for example, only takes payment via an app. And for the last 4 months, I've been taking my iPad out to send money over. So it's nice that I can just do it from the phone in my pocket again. As you mentioned, this kind of the third party rollout is something it does appear you're being intentional with and making sure it's the right partners and for the right use cases.
I've been having to take cash out of my bank and just pay things in cash. It's crazy.
Wow.
And something that we've been doing is recently we've been focusing on the features and making that a big part of development. And the next step is going to be focusing on the form, working with developers to make it very seamless and sleek. So form is the next big step of what we're going to be working with.
And something that we're very excited about that we want to roll out in the future. Right now, like Austin said, we're focused on function because one wants to use a functional phone. But with form, not only do we want it to be our form factor, but we think that there's a really cool opportunity to let artists and creators express themselves on the form. There's a big subsect of the dumb phone movement that people are bedazzling their phones and they're putting gemstones and rhinestones on it and they're expressing themselves through these cases and they're making it super fun. And we think that there is absolutely no reason that can't happen on our phone because it's not necessarily distracting to have a cool interface. So for example, this is just an example. I really like Banksy. what if Banksy were to make a skin? I would be all about that. And I would really want my phone to look like a Banksy piece. So whether that's big artists, whether that's small artists, whether that's a sports team, it would be cool for people to be able to express themselves through personalized interfaces. And so that's something that we really want to focus on in the long term as well.
Very cool. I think it is because the devices are so ubiquitous, almost like a car. People want to take the opportunity to customize and make it feel more like themselves, whether that's a paint job or a bumper sticker or a case on your phone or a skin. It's an interesting concept to explore.
And we don't have anybody in the pipeline for that. So if there's anybody that's listening that's an aspiring artist and wants to explore the digital form, hit us up. Well, we'd be super excited to see what you got.
Awesome. And speaking of what's coming up, without giving away too much, because I know you're a startup, you don't want to give away any trade secrets, but is there anything exclusive that you can tell us here on the Scroll Sanity podcast about what's coming up for SLEKE?
We are very excited to announce that we will be taking pre-orders starting May 4th. We're limiting it to a 100-person batch, and that's just because we want to be able to work with everyone using it. Try to call them as much as possible. Like we're doing with you, Nic, we're trying to stay in constant communication.
That's super exciting. Congrats on the launch of the pre-order May the 4th. I'm a Star Wars nerd, so I love the date also. But that's exciting because I know the more data a team like yours gets, the better you can improve the product. So slow and steady growth sounds like the right approach. It sounds like you have good heads on your shoulders. We're all really excited to see what comes from SLEKE. And so Austin, Brennan of SLEKE, thank you both so much for joining us on today's show.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, it was a pleasure.
Carmella, what is new on Substack for Scroll Sanity?
I recently took a trip to Montreal to see the total solar eclipse. That was a very inspiring experience for me. And so recent posts are going to be about being in that urban environment. It was interesting. I felt like the people around me in Montreal weren't using their phones as much as I noticed in the US. And I don't know if that was just because I was in a very urban city, but I just saw a lot of people reading books in the park and I was perplexed. And then also this experience of seeing the total solar eclipse, I felt completely embodied and just so present. It was spectacular, but also the come down of having that really intense experience, one that can never truly be recreated by photos or video. So that's something that I'm reflecting on the newsletter.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, the eclipse was a beautiful experience. I think it felt like people were all connected on this one day in a really profound way. So I'm excited for myself and the rest of your readers to get a chance to read that. Thanks again to Austin and Brennan from SLEKE for being on the show. If you want to learn more about SLEKE, you can visit sleke.io. That's SLEKE.io to learn more about those guys and the cool work they're doing. Carmella, what is coming up next for our listeners on the podcast?
So next up, we're going to be hosting a series of episodes about teens and smartphones. So we'll speak to different teens about their life with and without a smartphone, as well as a parent of a teen who's struggling to keep smartphones away from her teen. So make sure you're subscribed.
Awesome. Carmella, thanks for another great episode, and I'm really looking forward to that series.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.